Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are plunging into a phrase that, frankly, sounds like a line from a forgotten mystical text, or maybe a supremely frustrating final exam question in a philosophy course.
Cuckles. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
The negation of the negation.
It's one of those phrases that's almost guaranteed to give you immediate intellectual vertigo. It's cryptic, it's dense, and our source material confirms it's a textbook example of where philosophical language goes.
Yeah.
Well, it goes completely off the rails.
It seems designed to cause confusion just by its structure.
It really does, and that's why we need to unpack it really carefully right from the start.
Okay, let's do that immediately. Because when a person, when you first encounter negation of the negation, your mind performs this natural, almost inescapable reflex.
It does.
It goes straight to algebra.
Exactly, the linguistic comfort zone. The immediate analogy is the mathematical or, the algebraic principle.
Right. Minus times minus equals plus. A double negative in grammar, it just cancels out.
Yeah, I am not unhappy. It means you're happy.
Exactly. So if you negate a negation, you just affirm the original positive state. It feels intuitive, it feels logical, and it's deeply ingrained in how we process binary statements.
And that intuition, that very first immediate thought, is the trap. It's the first thing we have to escape from today.
So this is a warning then.
A huge warning. We have to issue it right at the gate for you, the learner. In philosophy, specifically in the context of the sources we are analyzing, that mathematical analogy is completely 100% misleading.
It's not what's meant at all.
Not even close. Following that path,
Yeah.
I mean, it just leads you to a dead end of useless logical gymnastics.
So what we're really grappling with here is a profound linguistic confusion. We have the word negation being used twice, but each instance is operating in a radically different field. It's like we're comparing apples and the entire conceptual framework for growing apples.
This is a perfect analogy. Precisely. Our mission today is to move past that verbal deception. We need to identify which specific negation is being negated because they are not symmetrical at all.
Okay. And then once we do that, we have to uncover the core philosophical insight that's hiding underneath all of this confusing language. Because this isn't about logic games.
No.
It's a really radical statement about the nature of reality itself.
So what's the ultimate payoff? I mean, what do you gain by taking this deep dive into such a thorny concept?
What you gain is the ability to distinguish between the result of thinking and the process of existence. That's the big prize.
Okay.
The core finding here is that this phrase, this negation of the negation, it's a signpost. It's pointing towards something far more fundamental than just simple categorization.
Something bigger than putting things in boxes.
Way bigger. It directs us toward the generative activity, the underlying process that creates the very world of static objects that we then come along and analyze using our neat binary logic.
So it reveals the limits of our own tools.
Starkly. It reveals quite starkly the limitations of language itself when it tries to describe a process rather than a result. That sounds like we're moving from being accountants of reality, just tallying things up, to being physicists of reality, investigating the forces that come before the facts.
I like that, yes. From accounting to physics, that's exactly the shift in perspective we're aiming for.
Okay, so let's start at the foundation then. If we're going to do this, we need to define that first negation, the one that is scheduled to be negated.
The one on the chopping blocks.
Exactly. So if we are going to negate a negation, we have to be crystal clear on what the standard, the classic negation even is. This has to be the framework that sets up our known reality, correct?
Absolutely. The first negation being referred to here is what we call classical negation. And this isn't some obscure concept. This is the logic of identity and difference that forms the backbone of, well, everything. Science, law, everyday conversation.
It's the logical infrastructure of what we call is.
Yes, exactly. It's the operating system. And importantly, it's the one we touched on before in our deep dive on qualia.
And the undisputed, non-negotiable ruler of that classical framework is the principle of the excluded third.
Tertium non datur.
No third possibility.
That's the engine room of the entire system. The principle of the excluded third dictates that any statement, any entity, must be either A or not A.
One or the other.
Always. Something is either true or false. It exists or it does not exist. There is no middle term. There is no ambiguity allowed within the system. This is what makes language and science and even computer programming reliable.
It creates a logically neat, I guess a deterministic and very binary world. But where does this negation operate? What's its domain of application?
It operates strictly within the realm of ontology, but a specific kind of ontology, the study of being. specifically the being of things.
The things.
The
Okay.
classical negation concerns statements about existence and non-existence. It's a mechanism for categorizing what is already there. It's a sorting hat.
Can you give me an example of this closed system in operation, something concrete?
Sure. Take, for instance, a hypothetical meeting agenda. It's an existent thing. Its negation is its non-existence. Now, if we're discussing whether that agenda includes a topic on, say, Q3 budget cuts,
Right.
the classical negation ensures that the topic is either on the list, which means it's existent within that context, or it's not on the list, non-existent.
Yeah.
There's no in-between state where the topic is sort of partially included or exists only hypothetically within the confines of that specific logical operation.
So it's either there or it's not. The file is either in the folder or it isn't.
Precisely, and that's the critical point. Classical negation inherently presupposes a closed, defined field of entities. Everything we're talking about, the being in question, is already considered given. It's pre-categorized as either potentially existing or non-existing within that boundary.
The stage is already set.
The stage is set, the actors are known, and classical negation is just the spotlight operator deciding who is on stage and who is off at any given moment.
So the system is designed to sort what is already present, or at least what is already conceptually possible. It takes existence and non-existence as its fixed starting poles.
Yes. Its job is categorization, not creation. It is the ultimate administrative tool for reality.
And its mechanics are incredibly simple. Negating an existent returns us to non-existence. Negating a non-existent returns us to existence. It's this perfect, closed, reversible loop operating within a predefined boundary.
A perfect binary switch. On-off, that's all it does.
Okay, that establishes the classical system,
Yeah.
the negation of things. But now we hit the central philosophical challenge, and I want to slow down here.
Good idea. This is the pivot.
If classical negation is a tool used exclusively to negate entities' existence or non-existence, how on earth can we possibly use that same logic to negate the negation itself? The relationship, the rule set. We are trying to apply a rule for objects to the very rule that governs objects. It feels like a category error.
That is the precise conceptual difficulty. That's the knot. We are attempting to move from the logical domain of what is to, let's call it the meta-domain of how the rules for what is were even formed.
And if we tried to treat the rule, the principle of the excluded third, as if it were just another existent entity,
we immediately commit the very error we're trying to expose.
Yeah.
We're using the system's own rules to try and break out of the system. It can't work.
So we have to make a conceptual leap, a jump that takes us completely outside this binary framework. All right, let's try to formally articulate that jump. If the phrase negation of the negation isn't simple affirmation, then the object of that second negation, it can't be an existent thing.
It can't be.
It must be the entire structural opposition itself.
That's it. That's the move. We are negating the classical negation relationship itself. The whole binary framework that demands everything must be either A or not A. We are challenging the precondition that limits reality to this binary choice in the first place.
I have to admit that phrasing negating a negation relationship is conceptually, well, it's naughty. How do you negate a relationship? It doesn't seem like a process our standard logic is equipped to handle at all.
It is conceptually confusing, and our sources acknowledge this difficulty explicitly. Our everyday language, it forces us to treat a relationship or a rule set as an object and noun, so we can talk about it.
We have to call it a relationship.
Right. But if we then try to negate that object using the classical rules, we simply get non-relationship, which it still leaves us trapped inside the binary framework of existence and non-existence.
We haven't actually broken out.
Not at all. We haven't achieved a fundamental philosophical breakthrough. We've just created a new linguistic placeholder. We're still in the same prison cell, just with a new label on the door.
So the negation we're actually looking for must lead us to something that is entirely alien to that binary structure, something that doesn't play by those rules.
Exactly. And the conclusion drawn in the sources is that to successfully negate this structural opposition, one must step outside of it entirely. This necessitates a search for the completely other. In German, das völlig andere.
The completely other.
It has to be something that by its very nature cannot be categorized within the existence versus non-existence paradigm. It has to be immune to that logic.
Now, this is a really crucial intellectual move because it immediately sets us apart from the most famous tradition that's associated with this phrase.
Yes. the Hegelian tradition.
That's right. For many people, if you say negation of the negation, their mind goes straight to Hegel's dialectic, the Aufhebung.
We have to dedicate a moment here to contrast this approach because it's a major fork in the road.
Okay, so can you explain Aufhebung for the learner who might only know the term generally? It's a tricky one.
It is. It's typically translated as sublation or cancellation, but it carries three meanings all at once. To abolish or negate something, to preserve it, and to lift it up to a higher level.
So you cancel it, but you keep the important parts and elevate them.
Precisely. In the Hegelian system, you have a thesis, which encounters its opposite, its antithesis. This conflict then leads to a synthesis, and the synthesis is the Aufhebung. It negates the conflict between the two lower forms, but it preserves the valuable insight of both in a new, more complex, higher form.
So if we apply that here, if the thesis is existence and the antithesis is non-existence, the Hegelian NDN would lead to a higher synthesis that somehow incorporates both.
Right. It might be a meta-category of being that contains both poles. It's a resolution within the system of thought, building a bigger, more sophisticated level.
A better logical container.
Yes. But the philosophical path identified by our sources is fundamentally different. It is not seeking a new level within the binary system. It is seeking the prerequisite conditions for the system to even exist in the first place.
It's an exit.
It's an exit. It's an exit from the entire opposition toward a non-dualistic, pre-logical dimension of being.
So, to use your metaphor, if the Hegelian NDN is about building a better, more complete container, our sources are pointing us to the process of building the container itself.
That's a crucial clarification. We are not looking for a resolution above the binary, but a source before the binary.
Which means the criteria for this completely other must be, well, it must be the logical domain for which the principle of the excluded third simply does not apply.
That's the test. That's the only way it can be truly other.
So to be really clear for you listening, we are searching for a category of reality where it is not true that something either is or is not.
It's simultaneously neither a fixed existence nor a fixed non-existence. Think of it like this. The classical framework is a map of a landscape. Every point on that map is a fixed existent, like a town, or non-existent, like an empty space.
Okay.
We are looking for the geological process, the tectonic activity, the erosion, the volcanism that created the landscape in the first place. Because that process itself cannot be accurately represented by a single fixed point on the map it creates.
That makes the task feel achievable rather than just abstract. And, based on our previous deep dive into qualia, I think I know where this is heading. If we are looking for the domain where the excluded third fails to capture the essence of what's happening, that domain was previously identified as the activity of the individual consciousness.
The connection is flawless. The concept that must function as the completely other, the conceptual key to negating the classical negation relationship is activity.
Let's integrate that transition smoothly for the learner. We referenced the qualia discussion, which was all about the nature of subjective experience. Can you remind us briefly why, in that context, activity resisted this kind of binary logic?
Certainly. If you recall, we found that subjective experience, qualia, couldn't be categorized as just a mere existent fact, thing in the world, nor could it be dismissed as a simple non-existent illusion. It wasn't a static object.
It was an event.
It was an ongoing subjective event. When you experience the color red, the experience itself is an ongoing flow of consciousness. It's an activity. You can't capture that fluid process with the statement, the redness exists, does not exist, because the act of experiencing is irreducible to the fact of the object.
That distinction, the act versus the fact, is vital here. So let's bring that definition of activity back to this discussion. We have to emphasize that this isn't just doing stuff.
Absolutely not. This activity is not a thing or a state like a completed object or a fixed psychological condition. It is defined as a temporal process, or in German, a Vorgang.
Yeah.
A term that really stresses that temporal flow, that ongoing occurrence.
It's fundamentally dynamic. It's always unfolding.
It is the Entstehungsprozess, the process of creation itself.
And that's the great discovery.
It is. The activity is the dynamic source that, in its unfolding, generates the final, static, binary world that classical logic then steps in to analyze. It is the activity that leads to the classical negation relationship of existence and non-existence.
Okay, now we can offer you, the listener, the key insight. The definitive translation. We can effectively translate negation of the negation into the process of creation of existence, non-existence.
That's it. The double negation, the conceptual struggle of the phrase, it's ultimately a philosophical toolkit. It's designed to force the mind out of the comfort of static logic and towards the dynamic nature of becoming.
That translation makes the abstract tangible, but let's challenge it slightly because this is where language so often traps us. We are calling it activity or process of creation, but wait, isn't even calling it activity already turning a fluid temporal flow into a static noun? An existent thing we can now talk about. Hasn't language already trapped us again?
That is the essential internal contradiction inherent in talking about the pre-logical. You have hit the philosophical tightrope we're all walking.
Yes.
The moment we name the process activity becoming, Vorgang, we conceptually freeze it. We make it seem like an entity.
So what's the solution?
The solution is to understand that the phrase negation of the negation is not the name of the entity. It is the philosophical instruction. It's saying, look at the activity, but remember that it resists the name you're forced to give it.
It's a pointer, not a destination.
Exactly, a pointer. Now let's make this concrete with the provided anecdote of the painter. It's a great illustration.
Okay, the painter.
So consider the activity of the painter. This is the domain of the NDN. It includes the mixing of colors on the palette, the brush strokes, the artist's shifting intention, the temporal flow of creation, the happy accidents, the mistakes, the corrections.
It's all happening in time.
Yes. And during this process, you cannot apply the excluded third to the painting. Is the painting finished or not finished? That's the wrong question because it is in the process of becoming finished. It's neither and both at once.
And then at some point, the painter puts down the brush, and you have the finished picture.
That is the result. And that result is immediately and completely subject to classical negation. The finished painting either exists on the gallery wall or it does not exist. The excluded third applies perfectly.
And the sources brilliantly highlight the absurdity of confusing the two. No one would ever look at the finished picture hanging on the wall and declare, look, a fantastic example of the negation of the negation.
Oh, yeah. Because that would confuse the result, the existent entity, with the process, the generative activity. The philosophical importance lies entirely in the process that precedes the result.
So activity is the completely other, because it is the necessary, non-binary, non-fixed condition required for the binary world of existence to even appear.
That's it. It's the source code.
This distinction between process and result, it immediately echoes some profound metaphysical discussions. It feels like we are touching on the relationship between reality itself and our conceptualization of it.
Absolutely. This is where we connect this modern analysis back to some fundamental philosophical tradition. This insight recalls a major theme in 20th century thought, particularly Heidegger's distinction between sein, being, and scientis, an existent entity.
Okay, let's clarify that distinction for the listener. It's a big one.
Scientis is the easy part to grasp. It's the specific thing we encounter. This microphone, the chair you're sitting on, the star in the sky, the concept of justice. It's any existent entity. Our classical logic works perfectly on scientists.
The things.
The things. But sein, being with a capital B, is the fundamental event or condition. Heidegger sometimes called it Erungnis, the event of appropriation. That makes it possible for any specific entity to even show up for us, to be thought about or to be encountered. It's the mystery of existence itself, not the mystery of any particular existent.
So the NDN, the generative activity, is pointing us toward being, sein, while the classical negation is focused entirely on the world of existent things, scientis.
Exactly. Our activity, the Anstehunds process, is the underlying event from which the world and its static binary meanings emerge. The linguistic confusion of negation of the negation is essentially our struggle to try and articulate this non-static event using static language.
We can also see this in phenomenology, can't we? This need to capture the living, flowing moment before it's categorized and pinned down.
That brings us straight to Merleau-Ponty and his concept of the non-dualistic Leibnizer Vollzug.
Which means?
It roughly means corporeal performance or embodied enactment. And we have a lived, fluid experience of the body and the world that precedes all the intellectual categories we impose on it later.
Give me an example.
When you are walking, the act of walking is a Vollzug. It's a non-binary process. You aren't just a collection of existing muscles or non-existent intentions. You are the seamless, ongoing performance of walking. The experience of it is a flow.
And that lived performance cannot be reduced to an existent fact like, my leg moved 2 feet, without losing its essential nature.
You lose the walkingness of it, yes.
So, the philosophical lesson of the NDN is essentially a methodology. It's a way of thinking. Reality is fundamentally a process, a becoming, a flow, and we must constantly guard against our own logical impulse to slice up that flow into static, binary blocks. That recognition of flow versus block, that's where the methodological rubber really meets the road. It brings us to the core reason why philosophy needs these cryptic phrases like the negation of the negation.
Hmm.
It's to warn us about the inherent failure of our language systems.
This is the deepest part of the deep dive. We need to detail the danger of the linguistic confusion that leads us down that minus times minus path in the first place.
Okay, let's explore the pitfall. When we use words like activity or process or even consciousness, we are attempting to name a verb, a duration, a flow.
And language immediately foils us. Language, particularly its subject-predicate structure, subject as action or subject as state, it forces us to treat this temporal, pre-logical process as if it were a static existing noun.
It's a baked-in limitation.
It is. We are compelled by our own grammar to use a structure designed for existent things to describe something that is defined by its very non-existence as a fixed thing.
We are constantly committing this grammatical conversion. We take the verb to think and we turn it into the noun a thought. We take the verb to be processing and we turn it into a process.
Yes. And the moment we create that noun, we subject it to the rules of nouns. And the primary rule is the excluded third. It exists or it doesn't.
Which is philosophically catastrophic. Let's walk through that. If you attempt to apply the classic negation to this fluid activity.
Linguistically, you can do it. You can negate activity to get non-activity.
Yeah.
The sentence is grammatically sound. It works in the language.
But logically, in a philosophical sense, it's a non-starter. If we adhere strictly to the rules of classical negation negating activity, it just makes it disappear into the category of non-existent.
Right. And then if you try to negate non-activity, hoping to get back to where you started, classical negation can only logically produce something existing.
Because that's its entire function.
That's its whole job, to classify things into the existent category. It cannot, by its very definition, produce a generative process. It can't produce the source of existence.
Because classical negation is a mechanism that operates within the domain of existence and non-existence, it simply doesn't have the conceptual tools to describe or generate the process that creates that domain in the first place.
The linguistic operation, though it's grammatically correct, it completely destroys the ontological content of activity. It collapses the dynamic process of creation into a static result. It mistakes the continuous flow for a fixed entity.
This serves as a powerful philosophical caution, then. The sources conclude that this entire discussion is a reminder to be incredibly careful with language in philosophy. It's not just about choosing the right terms, it's about recognizing the deep structural limitations that language itself imposes on our thought.
Philosophy, in this sense, becomes a constant Socratic struggle. Or as, Wittgenstein might describe it, a constant cleaning up of thought. We are perpetually fighting against the inherent tendency of our inherited language structure to force fluid concepts into fixed, manageable, binary categories.
It sounds like an internal battle against our own linguistic habits. Where do these habits lead us astray in, daily life, not just in philosophy?
The sources refer to the danger of being led onto thin ice by these habits.
Yeah.
Consider the process of feeling an emotion, say anxiety.
Okay.
The activity being anxious is a temporal flow. It's a complex, non-binary internal state of becoming. But language forces us to say, I have an anxiety.
Right. It becomes a possession, a thing.
Suddenly, anxiety becomes a fixed, existent entity, a noun that either exists or doesn't exist. And by doing that, we've reduced the complex, non-binary process of feeling into a static problem or a thing that must be removed.
And once we treat it as a fixed thing, we try to solve it with fixed binary tools. Stop it or keep it, treat it or ignore it, which are all tools that are incapable of addressing the underlying dynamic flow.
Exactly. We confuse the map with the territory every single time. The philosophical project, therefore, is to create an alert system, which the NDN serves as, to remind us that we are constantly using post-logical tools like language and classical negation to talk about the pre-logical source, which is activity.
So to reiterate the core methodological value for you, the learner, understanding the NDN isn't an academic exercise for its own sake. It is about gaining the critical skill to distinguish between the linguistic form, the noun we use to categorize something, and its true ontological content.
Right. Is that concept describing a static existence or a fluid, generative process? It trains you to pause and ask, is the grammar I'm using appropriate for the reality I'm describing?
It teaches us to spot the moments when our neat logical categories are actually masking a much more complex and maybe contradictory reality. Hashtag outro. This deep dive has completely reframed that cryptic phrase, negation of the negation. We started with that mathematical assumption,
Minus times minus.
differentiated it decisively from simple affirmation, located its source in the fundamental limitations of the classical logical framework, the excluded third, and then used the phrase as a roadmap to uncover the generative activity that precedes logic itself.
The breakthrough lies in recognizing that the NDN is a label for the temporal non-binary process of creation, the Entstehungs process, and that this process cannot be accurately categorized as existent or non-existent without collapsing its very meaning.
It is the activity of becoming.
It is.
So the ultimate lesson here is methodological, and it's something you can apply immediately to any problem, any strategy, any relationship you're trying to understand. Always start by asking one simple question. Does the principle of the excluded third apply here?
If the answer is yes, then you are dealing with static results. You're dealing with existence or non-existence.
Yeah.
You are analyzing the finished product, the budget report, the legal fact, the boundary lines on a map.
And this is the realm of classical logic, facts, and binary decisions. Your tools are analysis and categorization.
Right. But if the answer is no, if the subject is fluid, dynamic, subjective, or temporal, then you are dealing with a dynamic generative process. You're dealing with activity or creation.
You are analyzing the painter's thought process.
Or the shifting market dynamic, or the underlying culture of a team. That is the realm where you need a fundamentally different non-binary mode of thought.
While the phrase NDN is rare, the activity it describes is everywhere. Think of leading an organization.
If you treat corporate culture as a fixed document in a binder, a mission statement on the wall, you try to fix it or negate it using binary tools. But culture is, in fact, an ongoing activity, a temporal Volsug of every single interaction between every person.
You can't negate it.
You can't negate it. You have to engage the process of creation.
That distinction changes everything about how you manage people, how you innovate, or even how you plan your day. If you see your morning routine as a fixed existent that failed because you hit the snooze button, you only see failure.
Right.
But if you see it as a flowing activity that is currently being created, you see the opportunity to shift the flow, not just negate a static failure.
The most dangerous conceptual error is treating a process like a thing. It forces us into a relevant binary conflict when the solution lies elsewhere.
So here is the final provocative thought for you to chew on. If profound philosophical insight comes from learning to think about the process before the result, consider the most persistent problems in your professional life. Are you mistakenly treating a conflict, a project delay, or a challenging relationship as a static, existent, a fixed, definable problem that needs to be solved?
When you should instead be engaging with the fluid non-binary activity that is currently creating or changing that situation. The next time you find yourself stuck in a frustrating binary choice, in or out, yes or no, win or lose, step back and apply the methodological lesson of the negation of the negation. Where's the flow? Where's the activity? That's where the generative non-binary solution lies.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the structure of reality. We'll see you next time.